Good morning, everyone, to Sustainability Science. Welcome to Sustainable Science Days 2023. My name is İdil Gaziulusoy. I am from Aalto University, and I am one of the two scientific directors of the conference. And Susanna is the scientific director from University of Helsinki.
Warmly welcome also on my behalf. I am Susanna Lehvävirta, the director of HELSUS, Helsinki Sustainability Science Institute at the University of Helsinki, and we are really happy to open this conference.
With Sustainability Science Days, our aim is to encourage action-oriented sustainability science, create a knowledge exchange platform for the urgently needed sustainability solutions, and drive societal impact. Now, for the fifth time together, the conference is organized jointly by HELSUS and Aalto. We have a full program with 4 plenary sessions featuring keynotes from established academics and a panel dialogue with early career researchers, 6 parallel sessions, and a full day on Friday focusing on the implementation of systemic change. The theme of this year's conference is Pathways of Hope.
And that certainly is an important theme. When going through my short speech this morning, I was worried that I would sound just a person giving yet another ceremonial speech. Yet what I'm going to say comes from the bottom of my heart. And my husband even told me that I will sound pathetic. But I didn't change anything, so bear with me. People who are aware of what is going on the planet Earth may every now and then feel hopeless. I personally sometimes feel agonized about the situation. So at times like this week, it's important to focus on looking forward, focus on hope. And there is a lot we can do together if we so decide to build pathways to the futures that we want. So one thing we need to do is that we definitely need to build more systemic understanding and include strong multi-species approaches. To do this, we obviously also need to work in new ways together. I still sometimes hear claims that sustainability science is too dominated by social sciences or technical approaches. And at times I hear it's too much dominated by natural sciences. Sometimes these arguments sound so defensive that I'm afraid that it may hamper collaboration. So, how to get around with this? A common fallacy of humans is the so-called shared responsibility, which means that it's too easy to think it is not my business. Somebody else will take care of this issue. I'm just a drop in the ocean. I don't matter. So why should I join forces with other scientists from other fields speaking strange jargon that is hard for me to understand? Let others do that work. I hope in this conference, we all take responsibility because sustainability is everyone's business. I hope this event serves to bring all sciences and all societal actors together to share tables. In SSD, Sustainability Science Days, we will try to offer a forum that sincerely and bravely breaks silos and thought barriers. Thus, we encourage all of us to step into the zone of discomfort, to welcome the unknown, to learn from each other, and to unite our scientific and other skills. Okay, so let's feel insecure, let's feel ignorant, let's accept that none of us can know everything, let's be open about it, and let's join our forces in meaningful ways for the good of ourselves, for the good of the human beings, but also for the good of all species on the planet.
For me, this year's theme, Pathways of Hope, resonates well with my heart as well as it resonates with the call of our times. On the one hand, we need to be hopeful that if we act with urgency, we will be able to mitigate the worst impacts of sustainability challenges timely. On the other hand, we also should keep our hope alive that we will be able to develop our adaptive capacities to navigate the impacts that are already locked in and that we won't be able to avoid. That there are multiple pathways that we can collectively create to navigate this tumultuous period in humanity's history. It is a time to analytically, intuitively, and creatively rethink what it means to be alive, to be human at this time, and realign our humanity with everything else on this earth that supports us in becoming good ancestors for the more than human generations to come. Hope is an active force of aliveness. It is dangerous, yet it is the opposite of sitting and waiting in fear. As writer Rebecca Solnit said almost 20 years ago in her book, Hope in the Dark, hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. It is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shower you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from annihilation of the earth's treasures, and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. The hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future is what makes the present inhabitable. We wish you an inspiring, informative, and hope-giving conference. May you find your axes to break doors with.
Thank you.
Wow, what wonderful words and such inspiring words to open up what is going to be a wonderful, wonderful day. As mentioned, we are now going to have two keynotes. We are going to start with Minna Halme, who is joining us from Aalto University. I will let her do a better job of contextualizing who she is and why she is with us. And then she will have her presentation, and then we'll have an interlude for questions, and then we will be joined by Andy. So Minna, the floor is yours.
Very good morning to everybody in this hall as well as online. It's lovely to see so many of you here. Can you hear me well now? Super. So good morning again. Thank you first to the organizers for the big work that you have been doing for the conference. It's really, really massive. And secondly, thanks for inviting me to reflect over 30 years of sustainability in business research. I'm professor of sustainability management at Aalto University School of Business. And this year, our research group on the topic actually celebrates its 30th anniversary. I did not set up the group. I did come to the field in 1991, so it's a long time ago, but I joined the group in the latter half of 1990s. So what I'm gonna do now, and I hope that somebody puts my presentation on, thank you very much. I'm gonna speak about the past 30 years, and I'm trying to do it in such a way that it's not just kind of memorizing, but that there would be something to learn from this for the future as well. Next slide, please. Just a couple of words about myself. I'm at the moment primarily doing research which is on a co-creation of innovative sustainability solutions in a multidisciplinary international way, taking into account doing research both in global north, global south contexts. I teach in sustainability programs as well as in strategic management programs to ordinary students as well as to executive education. And I do a lot of societal impact work with the government, but primarily with companies. This is just so that you get a bit of an idea of what kind of, let's say, professional, personal take on this topic I have. Next slide, please. So what I would ask you now, many of you are younger than myself, is to imagine the world in the beginning of the 1990s. Soviet Union had collapsed. It seemed that democracy has won the day. Markets and market economy has won the day and will solve problems. And what business disciplines looked like at that time was not talking about the natural environment at all. In some countries, there was, of course, environmental legislation. Companies had to follow that. There were technologies for emissions, combating emissions and waste, but that was about it. And then the Rio conference took place, and in some business schools in the world, some relatively young researchers started speaking for including environment into the business decision making and action. And also at the level of practice, certain things were happening, and that gave the start for the what I would call the first wave of environmental sustainability questions coming into business practice as well as business research. Next slide, please. And you could call this era, Sofia, next slide, please. The environmental management era. And what was the pertaining question at the time was how can companies integrate environmental considerations into their business on a voluntary basis. At practice, you could see the first generation environmental management instruments coming to place, standards, certifications, environmental reporting, environmental labeling for products, and so on. Also, what was important at this point, remembering the market economy will solve things, was the competitiveness argument saying that markets will reward environmentally benign companies. I have a few pictures here. First, I thought that I should, do a lot of kind of, showing what all kinds of research there was taking place at the time. But then I decided to just pick parts of my own research for each of these waves that I'm gonna reflect upon here today. So as a practical example of these standard certification systems, you could think of, for instance, there being automotive companies that would adopt management systems for reducing their harmful environmental impact. What was achieved in practice was certain reduction of harm, but the tools that were developed were insufficient for making bigger changes. And the competitiveness question was really kind of a sort of a, open. Is there really competitiveness at the marketplace following from this? Next slide, please. The next idea that came about was the so-called eco-efficiency and the service solutions. Next slide, please, Sofia. And what this means is that businesses were starting to put together, let's say the pioneering ones, the ideas that, okay, let's do environmental protection in such a way that it will also bring us cost savings, will bring us through material and energy savings and so on. Let's try to get ecological and financial benefits at the same time. Eco-efficiency idea, product service systems, and this idea of more from less is from those times. You can see the cars here, smaller cars or car sharing schemes and so on. But not really in plenty to the market yet, but were very much being researched and promoted by the pioneers. What was achieved in practice with these ideas were relative efficiency improvements, but actually not absolute reduction of negative environmental impacts. So clearly this was not sufficient either for combating the environmental problems from production and consumption. Let's go to the next wave. And now we come to the 2000s. Globalization, re-regulation had risen, had increased, had accelerated a lot. And here we come to the next ideas, and there were like two parallel ones. Next slide, please. One was the social questions of corporate responsibility coming to the fore, meaning that the questions of human rights in the supply chains in the third countries were becoming a bigger topic. So for instance, in Finland, business managers had used to say that the laws take care of, the legislation takes care of human rights. We can think of the environmental questions, but we don't have to think of the social sustainability questions, but they no longer could do so because this question was so pertinent and so much of the manufacturing was being outsourced to countries without such legislation. And another idea that started accelerating was the question of how can businesses innovate new solutions to environmental and social problems. So for instance, here in my image is Mika Anttonen's and Ilkka Herlin's collaboration for capturing CO2 and making fuel with a certain chemical process out of that. That came much later, but this research question that illustrates this particular research question well. What was achieved in practice? Okay, human rights became a pertinent topic in the discussion of sustainability in business. Standard certifications for that came about, and also a lot of sustainability innovations got on the way, both environmental, but to some extent social ones as well. But it was not to be seen that there would be major system level changes resulting from those innovations. Now we can go forward again. Then we come to closer to 2010s, and what was remarkable at that time was that climate change got both in business and in politics more legitimate. So it was no longer that you had to so much try to convince business people and politicians that it really is an issue, and that gave rise to certain things such as the sustainability transitions, and especially in the business field, CSR impact and the impact investings, very kind of early phases in research, and some examples in practice as well. And now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So so now the question started more being like, what can businesses do together with others? How to co-create with other, collaborate with other stakeholders, other sectors for impactful and system level sustainability. And here, if you ask what was being achieved in practice, the terminology of ESGs, which comes very much from the finance world, environmental, social, and governance, that started sprouting, and now it's gained a lot in in popularity, but also, of course, in terms of criticism. Green transition is being embraced by business, but we can also see that green transition actually requires regulation and economic incentives, that it's not only markets that will take care of it. And now moving forward, where are we today? We have the environmental polycrisis, climate change, climate crisis continues, loss of biodiversity is going on, the water crisis is pertinent in many countries. A big thing in practice at the moment is that the finance sector is more and more coming in and is more and more being also pushed toward use its power to change business. The new paradigms that are taking more foothold at the moment are system in the sustainability in business research. Systems thinking, alternative forms of ownership, degrowth, post-growth. They are not emerging now. They've been there as ideas for a longer time, but they are taken much more seriously now. Regenerative organizing, a very, very nascent new issue in business sustainability studies. Next slide, please. Thank you. Over these 30 years, a lot has been happening in terms of action and tools in practice. Also, research, sustainability in business research has boomed. But the tools and research haven't really been able to properly combat the crisis that is going on, and that's denoted by my red sector in the slide. I'm not saying we should lose the hope, but I'm saying it's serious, and we really do need these new paradigms. Next slide, please. So, and actually we can go to my my final slide already from here, because I said what was there. So if I'm now looking back and looking at this sort of a big picture over the 30 years, what you can see is that there have been these waves of interest toward environmental and social sustainability that have come about and have made also businesses taking it more seriously. But then always something happened, and then the interest kind of reduced a bit. And after some years, something else came about, and the other wave came, and the waves have taken the situation for better. But then now we are living in this interesting era that ever since COVID broke out, there has been increasing interest toward sustainability within business companies, and there hasn't been really like the wave going down. So the question is, will the interest in sustainability remain this time? Then there are certain persistent questions without answers. The question of capitalism and what forms of capitalism. We are now living in ultra-capitalistic times, not necessarily totally so in our country yet, but in general, very much so. GDP growth, that is a pertinent ideology for most governments of the world. Shareholder profit maximization with very short-term perspectives. how will these fit together with the sustainability change? And in a way, the parts of the sustainability in business debate and research and action is sort of a response or part of the neoliberal economic ideology that has been strong or becoming stronger over the past 30 years, and which is now gaining more criticism, but remains strong. How do these fit together? Then these ESGs and how everything is put into numbers, into very complex numbers. And when something becomes primarily complex numbers, how much will that crowd out the morality and the attention to the big essential questions? And not wanting to sound hopeless, but still wanting to pose the question, having looked at these different ideologies and tools that there have been for business sustainability over the years, I can't help asking that will everything that business adopts for the purposes of sustainability management water down some of the ideas that were originally there that gave rise to that particular idea. And essentially, I want to leave you with a question of can an economy which is based on values such as short-term profit maximization, GDP growth, and ever increasing efficiency as a response to problems, can these values produce a sustainable future? Can they be the basis of a sustainability transition? And here is a link to a blog that I've written on the topic, and there I also have some responses and ideas for new values, but they are not part of this presentation. So I just say thank you for your attention, and I hope to discuss with you about these issues later on.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful keynote. We now have about 10, oh, this is very meta. Ooh, we go on forever there, don't we? We have about 10 minutes for questions. I want to remind our participants joining us in the hybrid space that you are welcome to ask questions via the Q&A. And then in the room, we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. And I'd also like to invite, if anybody's standing in the back, we are still here for another 45 minutes. We've got plenty of seats down front. So if you would like to sit, please don't be shy. Come on down, okay? Welcome. So if anybody has a question, if you could please raise your hand. Wonderful.
Hi, thank you very much, Minna, for your presentation. I'm Janne Hukkinen from the University of Helsinki.
We're doing a little readjusting in the room of physical folks, so we're going to give it just half a second, and then we will go back to that question. So anybody joining us online, we're just shuffling a bit.
Okay.
10 more seconds of shuffling, but I'm really glad that everybody felt comfortable to come and sit. Like I said, it is going to be one more keynote, so good that we're all settled and comfortable together. All right, I think we're now officially good.
Yes, I'm Janne Hukkinen from the University of Helsinki. Thanks for the presentation. In principle, I buy your a description of the evolution of sort of business-related environmental research. My question relates more maybe to the environmental politics of research, environmental management research. In other words, to what extent do you think environmental researchers and what we now would call sustainability science researchers are themselves responsible for the evolution that took place? In other words, the finding of, in the early part of this evolution, the finding was that eco-efficiency does not work because of rebound. What was the response? Let's expand to the social and economic dimensions of sustainability and start studying those. Let's not pursue the tough issue that in addition to ecological efficiency, you need to set absolute limits to the consumption of material resources. So we, in a sense, we watered down the agenda of research. Then in the social and economic dimensions, we found yet again, there are issues. We decided, oh, the problem is even bigger. We need to expand to sustainability transitions, which is a systemic problem and extremely complex. And so it went on. We complexified and at the same time watered down the issues, and at the same time, from the political sense point of view, we did not tackle, did not pursue in a socially responsible way the findings that we actually found.
Yeah, Janne, thank you very much. This is a very good question, and you can imagine that that is a question that I often also think about. And I'd say that if I think, for instance, our research group, which is about a bit less than 30 members, we were always sort of, saying that there needs to be smart regulation. And for the past 15 years, many of us have quite actively been also like sort of speaking against economic growth and against short-term shareholder profit maximization. But I'd say that it's also that part of the message is not taken in very easily. So the message that is taken in more easily is the message of innovations will save the world. So my response to you is that yes, we are partially responsible, and actually I'm sort of I'm very much trying to tell my junior colleagues now, when, for instance, circular economy is a hype, that it has a lot of reminiscence to what eco-efficiency once was, and what some other ideas once were, that it looked like this is going to solve it. And yet you should at the same time say that great things, but yes, do the capping, that do speak about, more about those fundamental values on which we base our lives as citizens, and as how we organize our economy.
All right, wonderful. How about we go with this lovely lady in the jean jacket?
Good morning, and thank you for your very thorough speech. I was wondering, I come from the health sector. I'm a professor in healthcare science, and I'm looking to the civil sector, our society and our services and our public service sector. We have not really demanded them to be sustainable. I mean, in this country, we have really vast differences in socioeconomic issues, which is a fundamental part of the sustainability. So why isn't there really a lot of dialogue in between the civil society actually and the corporate society? I don't see a lot. And why aren't we challenging actually the public sector to be sustainable? Because for us as being a citizens, that's something that we can influence. So we are sort of externalizing the sustainability development into the corporations and looking at this innovation policy. So we are sleeping actually in two sectors. So how could the corporations and companies then force the political system and the importance of regulation? Like looking at what's happening in EU in regulative discussions, it's always like going not in the sort of a citizen's perspective rather than perspective of money. And as we all follow the negotiations nearby about healthcare or education, is always about the money. So aren't the societies having a social responsibility, a responsibility for social responsibility, which is part of sustainability, if you understand my thinking?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, politicians do have the responsibility, but I don't actually see the situation in the same way. I think that citizens are demanding politicians to be environmentally and socially responsible. I think that this sort of perception in the public that, oh, you know, it's businesses that are asking for environmental legislation from the government, and they want government to do this and that. It's kind of interesting because at the same time, when there are these like forerunning businesses and a lot of sort of sustainability talk around what business is doing, there are also the trade associations and various other kinds of lobbying activities going on, which are actually less visible and are putting quite a lot of pressure on governments in different countries of the world not to impose stricter environmental, sometimes also stricter social welfare policies. But that is so much happening somewhere where we don't see. And you only see it if you are doing research on this. And I've been over at least for 10 years, I've been saying that if the trade association, so this is etujärjestöt, if they would start lobbying more for those who are the sustainability pioneering businesses, a lot could happen. But instead they are lobbying for the status quo and for those who are actually more the laggards in the business, who are the ones who have, you know, interests to protect. So there is all that going on, and that's actually it's the EU level, at the EU level, but it's also in the how legislation is being set up and implemented in this country. It does influence. So I must say that I see the situation slightly differently from how you saw it.
All right, wonderful. Let's go to the back in the blue shirt. This will be our last question for this part of the keynote session.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. So, Stefan Hauser, I'm a postdoc at HELSUS. I'd like to rebound on your last comment with the HELSUS, sustainability and at the EU level, and the lobbying problem, because last week there was a conference which was called Beyond Growth Conference in Brussels, in the European Parliament, and political leaders came like von der Leyen, the President of the Parliament, and some commissioners, and they seem a bit clueless on the questions of degrowth and post-growth.
May I ask you to stand up, because I don't hear you well. Maybe that helps if you stand up.
Okay, like this is better. Sorry, should I restart or
no, you can continue.
Okay, so basically my question is, how can we change this this lobbying issues when actually the political elites seem to be quite ignorant of these questions of degrowth and the need to regulate the society and also companies? My question is then double also because I realized that the people are ready to change, but the companies are not necessarily. And in your presentation, you were talking about the change of ownership of resources, but why not talking about the change of ownership of companies that exploit or often owns these resources? So that's why my question is a bit double.
Yes, thank you. A very good question, which actually in a way had multiple questions in it. Firstly, to like what should we do we should more and more speak about the need of regulation, and we should actively push forward that message instead of sort of engaging overly much into this kind of, businesses will lead the way. Some businesses lead the way. And then what we should also recognize is that there are these very different types of businesses. There are the pioneering ones, and they are the ones who would actually benefit from the stricter regulation often. And then there are those who are the incumbents, the ones that are already there and who are benefiting the status quo. And this is something that I would actually, in a way, more like to see also coming from the sustainability science community, and more recognition between that there are different types of businesses, and not taking these easy positions that business is bad or business is good. Business is solving the problems, or they are just causing the problems. And then as regards this, I think you were asking about this ownership question. I think that also we should discuss that more and push kind of more the debates about what alternative forms should there be for ownership. So I'm not really sort of suggesting that how to put it, that do illegal activities and take the private properties away from companies immediately, because that's really a useless message. It just creates a lot of opposition. But starting to discuss about in groups through exactly the kind of conferences that the Beyond Growth and so on, but also in our country and at different national levels in different countries of the world, asking this question about how should ownership be organized, and coupled with that there should be the question of how to include the externalities into prices, like environmental externalities and the externalities coming from social exploitation of those people who have weak negotiation power in the global marketplace. So basically, activities that have visibility, writing, organizing action, doing research, and so on, and trying to be vocal about these themes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Time always moves so quickly. Unfortunately, we're out of question time at this moment, but another big round of applause, please. And I do know that after this session, we will have some coffee time. So there is probably time to catch up and ask some of those hanging questions. And for anybody joining us in Zoom, we will be sharing the questions that came in during the Q&A. So hopefully I'll be able to get some kind of response to those a little bit later. All right, we are now moving to our second presentation of this session. And I'm going to do a little bit of computer stuff for just a second while we get Andy connected. Well, he's connected. He's there. You can see him. But let's get him in the right view for us. So give me just a moment here. All right. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sophia. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here. What a great start to the morning. My own pick up very strongly on where Minna came to in her great talk, and also try to do some justice to what I thought were the inspiring words at the beginning by İdil and Susanna. So without further ado, I'll now have a little bit of a commotion to share my screen. And yeah, I'm Andy Stirling. I've worked at the University of Sussex for a lot of years on a number of things, including the STEPS Centre, which tried to develop methods and modes of action around pathways to sustainability. So it's a huge pleasure for me to be invited to talk to this conference with its very nice framing, pathways of hope, knowledge, action, and solutions. And I'm going to follow up on what we've already been talking about by just thinking through what it takes to be serious about commitments that are now absolutely widely accepted in the world for transformations to sustainability. And to kind of spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the need to move our thinking from policies for control to a politics of care. And when I say move our thinking, it's not because I think just analysis, certainly academic analysis, can change things. Quite the reverse, to pick up on a theme we were just discussing. I'm interested in how the challenges we're facing for the sustainability science community, as for others, are not just about speaking truth to power. They're about recognizing how power shapes truth, the truth that we so often find ourselves trying to speak, as very nicely summarized over the years by Minna, actually is already bears the imprints of power. So let's take a look at what that means in practice. And at the end, if you think it's kind of a little bit high concept, I will at the end try to draw concrete implications for sustainability science methods. So please, if you think it's a bit abstract, please bear with me to that point and see what you think. I'm just going to hide that. Right. So let's start by thinking, what is it that sustainability is trying to transform? We all know the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. Among them, albeit among many compromises, are aims to eradicate hunger, to end climate disruption, to reverse global inequalities between nations, gender, races, to end poverty in all its forms everywhere, and to leave no one behind. These are the aims agreed by more than 190 countries, signed up to on the most elite of global platforms. So we don't need to bring in any kind of outside perspective to recognize that the scope of these aims goes well beyond what governments have ever done, well beyond markets, finance, what innovation can or has ever achieved, what can be done with infrastructure on their own, and certainly beyond any particular sector that might have a transition or a policy mix. It's not to say these things are not crucial, but what we're talking about, uncontroversially, without doubt, extends far beyond any of those things. In fact, it's quite telling, I think, in regard to what I said about the knowledge we try to convey already bearing the imprints of power, is that if we ask this question, what is sustainability trying to transform? We don't have a name for it. It's too inconvenient to name what it is that sustainability is actually trying to transform. Because you don't have to think very long before you realize that it's even bigger than capitalism. After all, hunger, environmental degradation, poverty, inequality, these are characteristics of societies that are well beyond and before capitalism. So what we're trying to shift here is bigger than capitalism. And yet it's already, in the spirit of the allusion to hope in the title of this conference, it's already well acknowledged that it is easier to end the world than the end of capitalism. And yet what we're talking about is bigger than something we're not even able to imagine the end of. I think that's a sign of how power is constraining the way we think, and we need to attend to that. So we can call it different things. There's all kinds of discussions to be had about what that is. The name I suggest, for the purpose of this talk anyway, is colonial modernity, a formation that's been developing over the last few hundred years, organized around imaginations of globalized control, stratification of the world, appropriation of property and resources, extraction, accumulation, concentration on a scale and a depth that the world has never seen before. And a clue then to the importance of decolonizing knowledge about this formation, naming it, recognizing that it's intrinsic to challenges of sustainability, is to get beyond this block and think about what it takes to transform our world. If we're trying to transform our world, then this means overturning colonial modernity, decolonizing business, government, culture, in all the forms we said. And of course, it's picking up from the previous discussion. When I mention business here, it's important to remember that business itself is older than capitalism. Business is older than modernity. It is not intrinsically implicated in coloniality either, because it's come in many different kinds of societies. So there's nothing about this agenda that should be thought to be in some way in tension with business. It just is a little bit more profound in the implications that it holds. So let's then think about what is the ways in which our immersion as a sustainability science community in colonial modernity is imprinting the way we think about what the conference title calls solutions. Now, it's a long story, but for the sake of just being brief about it, it's really quite clear from a large variety of different understandings of what constitutes modernity itself, is that it is founded around an imagination of control, extrapolating, one might say, metastasizing from the experience of operating, relating to functioning machines. This idea that you interact in a particular singular way with a singular aim, and out comes a particular consequence in a one-to-one mapping onto your aims, without side effects, without feedback loops. This is a very familiar experience. I'm trying to do it now with my computer. We all know how to do it. No matter how radical we may be, we interact in all sorts of intimate ways with the world in that form. But control is a very particular imagination. When it starts being extended from the domain of machines to the world, then we start seeing problems. But it is this extrapolation that constitutes colonial modernity in many different kinds of ways, in many different fields of life. So, for instance, in our own field of governance of the activities that are implicated in sustainability challenges, we see the prominence of sound science, pro-innovation, evidence-based policy, a very controlling agenda, all about storylines asserting the way forward. And we see then this behind notions that have come up already around private profit, economic growth, and what's often not mentioned so much, but is actually arguably even more powerful in the world, even before the current tragic war in Europe. We have military domination. And what's really crucial about those three points, private profit, economic growth, and military domination, is that no matter how skeptical we may be about the compromises and gaps in the Sustainable Development Goals, what is truly radical and significant about that platform is that among the 300 and so metrics, there is none that actually these three do not appear anywhere among them. GDP is implicated, but not growth per se. So controlling approaches to environmental action then can be recognized in this light, that actually it's this imprint of colonial modernity in this imagination of also to the ways we think it's possible to transform societies towards more sustainable configurations. We see the grand challenges. We see discussions of energy transitions predicated by the definite article the, often with a grand in front of it as well. We see notions of the Anthropocene, again, the Anthropocene extending notional human control over the entire planet. We see an emphasis on nudge strategies. We see the nexus, again, asserting this singular controlled, objectified problem. We see planetary boundaries, planetary dashboards, supposedly the means by which we control our way out of sustainability, with this same basic understanding that the world is like a machine. There is, in fact, a cockpit with a dashboard, and the challenge is to influence that dashboard so that we get steered away. And this is not an abstract sort of discourse analysis. If you look into some of the most pressing issues, for instance, climate disruption, one can see the very material imprints of this in the way climate geoengineering visions, for instance, are hardwired in notions of what it takes to deal with this challenging climate imperative that's upon us. For instance, we see the challenge as being one of stabilizing global climate into some kind of notional optimal Holocene state, not recognizing that actually before the massive disruptions caused by industrial activities, climate itself is intrinsically dynamic. Are we in fact imagining ourselves in a world where climate would be stabilized by human action? And likewise, within these agendas around climate disruption, we see the role of what's euphemistically termed negative emissions technologies. Technologies to, in fact, aspire to try to control the world's climate. This is the way in which the control agenda of modernity has imprinted what is supposedly its own critique. So my point then is actually we don't need to subscribe to any particular political view to say this is an extraordinarily eccentric vision of the world, that there is in fact a cockpit. The world is not a machine. There is no cockpit. This is not how any kind of historical change takes place, let alone progressive transformation. What transformation can we think of from the past around emancipation of women, decolonization, the end of slavery, the welfare state, gay liberation? What transformation of a progressive kind can we think of that was actually driven by the kinds of mechanisms that we're actually trying to drive the sustainability transformation with? These were not driven by evidence-based policy, by sound science, although expertise and policy making played honorable roles, they were not the drivers, they followed. What really changed, and what we really have hope in now, I think, is collective action, mutual coordination, not these storylines of one way forward, but like flocking behavior in nature among birds or fishes, horizontal, mutualistically coordinated action at the level of culture as a whole, at the level of what I'm calling colonial modernity. And there is not just then one pathway forward. There are many, many different intersecting and cross-cutting pathways of possible change. These stories of there being a single path, that we need to keep it simple, there's just one direction, are the kinds of stories that are told falsely to maintain privileges for those interests that are currently in privilege. So when critics criticize for lack of control, they're actually reinforcing the notion that it is about control. So what are we then pointing to as sources of alternatives? Well, they've already been alluded to really nicely in what we've heard. We're not short of social movements. The entire sustainability agenda is based on collective action by social movements all around the world, murmurating in this kind of way. That's why the sustainability agenda actually holding imagination of controlling of colonial modernity. And if just get a bit more granular about this, if we think about the specific agenda, sustainability, social equity, human well-being, ecological integrity, so what we see is the same basic dynamic. We see that this is far more about caring for values of ecological integrity, of future generations, of the many, not just a few, for plural perspectives, diverse pathways, a convivial, living together well in this more murmurating way. This is what sustainability has been about right since its inception. And this is why, for instance, when entrenched interests of the kind, for instance, I don't want to be unfair on The Economist, but it was a nice example of what I'm saying, when that very plurality, that diversity, that openness of the SDGs were critiqued quite intensely by The Economist, among others, for being not the SDGs Sustainable Development Goals, but the stupid development goals. Why were they stupid? For The Economist, it was because they're so plural. They disrupt this storyline of a singular controlling agency, which is so essential to the maintenance of privilege in a turbulent world. And if we think more concretely about the kinds of issues that constitute sustainability agendas, again and again, histories of the amelioration, at least, of all kinds of environmental pollution, pesticides, asbestos, ionizing radiation, heavy metals, chlorofluorocarbons, endocrine disrupting chemicals. Again and again, the story is clear that it was at the early stages, business, government, and academia that offered huge obstacles to these issues. They were ridiculous at their inception. It was only after cultural movement pushed those established centers of interest into taking them seriously that they were. So the idea that academia somehow is leading this, I'm afraid, is a little bit eccentric. Academia can play crucial roles, but it's following these essentially much more political movements. And we see the same with the responses, what the conference title calls solutions: ecological farming, closed cycle production, renewable energy, super efficiency. of the kind we just heard summarized. These again, I'm 60 years old now, quite old, but when I was getting into these issues back in the late 70s, these were ridiculous. You were really quite eccentric. You were part of the counterculture if you thought that these things had any kind of merit. And now, whatever we may be arguing about, at least in terms of lip service, these are mainstream. And it's also reflecting, interested to reflect about the microdynamics here, that when we look at something like wind power, for instance, it's easy to imagine a counterfactual world in which wind power would simply not exist on anything like the form that we currently have. The intellectual property of these major, including in China, right around the world, developing wind power, much of them go back to Denmark. And why was it that it was Denmark that so much of this IP goes back to? Well, to simplify a complex story, the fact that Denmark was at the time the only actively anti-nuclear country, which was able to resist what in Sweden, Germany, UK, USA, Japan, the nuclear industry was able to influence, and the fixation with nuclear as a response, driven by military aims, was able to actually exterminate the idea. We tried it, wind power, it just doesn't work. Only in Denmark, where that kind of overbearing imprint of power and knowledge was actually able for a brief period to be suspended, was it possible to show that this in fact was not the case and these technologies had enormous potential. So what can we do about this then in the sustainable science community in order to address these kinds of challenges? How can our work in academia or other privileged settings that are represented, I know, amongst people in the conference, be more deliberately oriented towards concrete action to support this emancipatory struggle that sustainability agendas represent, without inadvertently reinforcing these regressive countervailing forces that I'm pointing to that are imprinted even in our own agendas quite often? Well, in terms of methodology, I think there's quite, even in academia, to recognize the roles of the kind I've talked about. You could call it hacking methods. Hacking, it's not as if there's a particular cluster of methods that will deliver us, but there's things we can do with all kinds of methods to help to address the agenda that I'm talking about, moving from this one way forward, singular, objectified, definitive vision of the solution through to this much more messy pattern on this Icelandic beach that I show you here, representing the pathways of hope that the conference title actually alludes to. So let's think about a typical method. It could be of any kind, qualitative, quantitative, expert, participatory, of the kind that are used in sustainability science, in business, in government, in academia. Let's think about those methods of things that have inputs and outputs. Let's talk that machine language just for the sake of putting the point over. So the inputs for the methods can be relatively narrow or relatively broad. What they take account of, what they attend to, what they illuminate. This can be relatively narrow or broad in terms of the kinds of challenge that are looked at, social or environmental, different challenges all interacting together or just singular ones. The options for action. Are they just looking at a particular technology that has been prior highlighted by the governance environment and then just seeing, is this sustainable or not? Or are they comparing different options? Do they look at benefits as well as harms in ways that the global system typically does not do? Do they look at fairness and distribution directly? Do they address uncertainty in its real, deep and broad sense? Do they actually interpret the pictures that they're generating through different perspectives, different interests, different values, and show how those different framing assumptions typically change the picture given by any method? Do they do all those things in terms of their inputs? And then on the other axis I'm just showing you now, we can think about the outputs of our sustainability science methods, how they speak to wider society, because it's typical. You can, in fact, for instance, take a global assessment. They may be very broad in their inputs. They may take account of a lot of different dimensions of the problem, but typically the people involved think it is their responsibility to give a singular, closed, definitive picture, the answer, the solution, the evidence-based recommendation. Instead, what these methods can do is open up a space, catalyze, provoke, inform a more political environment. Instead of closing it down as a policy to support policy actors to justify themselves and their favored actions, we can open up to show how actually sustainability challenges are intrinsically political, that actually any method we might employ of any of the kinds I've mentioned can actually be legitimately how it's implemented and what the details are. In other words, we produce in sustainability science what I call plural and conditional answers. We show that under assumptions X, then it would follow that A is the best response. Under assumptions Y, it would be B. And too often it's not just incumbent power and interests that restrict that, it's the zeal and the genuine commitment of analysts who think that the only way to really get people to respond to your actions is if you're exaggeratedly confident, self-confidence, ignoring the uncertainties and asserting a particular idea. So this applies, as I said, across a whole range of methods: expert, analytic, participatory, deliberative methods. They all can be used in these kinds of ways. So this is not a partisan, disciplinary, or even political message. It can be very practical to do it in all these areas. And of course, no one method comes in a very closed form. The devil is often in the detail. Different kinds of methods, for instance, citizens' participation, citizens' juries, consensus conferences. The clue's in the name, by the way, that often when these practices of deliberation and inclusion are undertaken, they do so with the idea they have to come to a settled conclusion in that top left box. We can employ the same methods to actually inform far more wider discussion. Actually, what counts as a sustainability pathway does vary depending on how it's looked at. And so what we need then is a more democratic, wider environment. We can't just plug and play with a citizen participation and solve the problem in a machine-like fashion. We have to provoke and catalyze democratic discussions, democratic deliberation, collective action of the kind that has delivered, as I say, the transformations of the past. And likewise, the same thing is true of quantitative methods, which are typically used in an aggregative form, like risk assessment, like cost-benefit analysis, like ecosystem services, to pretend that actually the evidence leads to a settled ordering of the different policies. And we can instead look at the uncertainties, which are typically hidden, or even unpick systematically how different perspectives legitimately come to different conclusions about what count as more and less sustainable recommendations we might make. So I'm talking about then moving from a reproduction of this modernistic control imagination around there being just a single way forward, the transition, to a recognition of there being multiple pathways and it being a matter for democracy. And by democracy, I'm not just talking about elected representatives, I'm talking about the capacity to challenge power, the access by the least powerful to the capacities for challenging power of a kind that have always been intrinsic to social movements, to collective, a host of different moves that one can make, what one sees in that literature of horizontal action. It's not about informing the cockpit and therefore reinforcing the false idea that there is a cockpit. It's about taking direct horizontal action, including in the way we talk about our science, the way we talk about our evidence, and the way we talk about our business activities. As I mentioned, business and academia are older than modernity, they're older than coloniality, so we don't have to think somehow they're imprisoned in it. They can think their ways out of this and act their ways out of this. But I haven't got time to elaborate all those things. I should finish now and see what kind of discussion people would like to have about this. But just to be a bit more explicit then, I've tried to outline a general perspective that steps back a little bit unusually from the challenges. I've tried to talk about implications for methods. I'm talking about the difference for sustainability science between pushing for controlling transitions and instead trying to enable caring transformations, away from singularizing imaginations of sustainability to more plural ones, away from the idea that it has to be knowledge that drives action, to recognize that knowledge and action are entangled. Knowledge is often imprinted by action and the desire for particular actions as it is catalytic of them. To remove from closed, rigid categories to much more open-ended relational view of the world. To drop some of the hubris of scientific and instead have a more humble approach to resonating values, to collectivity. To maybe shift away from such disproportionate emphasis of technological solutions to social innovations, cultural expression, creativity as part of what it takes to transform society. And recognize that this will not be directed under incumbent structures, but shaped by unruly subaltern agency from below. Tightly disciplined expertise then is part of the problem. What we're looking at is multiplicities of knowledges engaging in this far wider sense. And in the end, getting away from this extremely expedient fashion in which sustainability has been coerced into being driven by fear, 5 years to save the planet. The interests this serves are not very attractive interests, and instead being, as this conference has recognized, motivated by hopes. So I know this is a stylized distinction. It's a polythetic arrangement. It's not a dichotomy because there's so many elements that don't move together, but I hope this is at least accountable to see what I'm getting at, that I think it's not only entirely feasible, this is in fact what is happening around the challenges of sustainability, moving from controlling transitions to caring transformations. Thanks very much for bearing with me.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Anna Krzywoszyńska from the University of Oulu. Thank you so much that we have a bit of time. This is really wonderful.
Yes.
I had a couple of points. So firstly, I completely would like to recognize and reinforce what Professor Andrew was saying about the change coming from society. And I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for allowing me and Dr. Galina Kallio to organize a closed workshop for actually for participants from social movements that is happening today on carbon knowledges. I really think that this is a very good signal that academia is becoming a more open and permeable place, recognizing that these innovations are indeed coming from society and that we need to listen more and follow. So that's the first point. Secondly, I wanted to ask both of the keynote speakers. I think, as usual, Professor Stirling really gives us something to think with. The concept of colonial modernity is really wonderful, and this tension between control and perhaps care is more problematic, but more on that maybe later. So the question of the breakdown of a control paradigm, I think, is absolutely well recognized. My question now is, do we have, having Professor Stirling cited the very conflictual modes through which control is usually challenged, do we have non-conflictual models already out there in business and in society and government in which resistance or plurality does not only proceed through violence, because that's really what we're talking about here, violence and oppression, but proceeds through positivity, or is it in the way that the professor from Aalto University acknowledged that these good values become actually rather diluted once they are embraced by these centralized modes of governing, which are business and state governments. In other words, considering that the structures within which we operate are basically based on problematic values of controllability as inherent in this colonial modernity, is there any other way than the complete revolution of these structures? Thank you.
Well, that's a great question. I wish I were there to join in the session you mentioned. It sounds great. I don't know, Minna, maybe you'd like to come back as well on this as invited. But while you think about that, I think it's a great challenge. I think that the idea of complete revolution is itself quite controlling. This is why they so often tragically fail and become part of the very problem that they were seeking to address. That the idea they have to be complete and total, this totalizing, controlling idea. It's like the metaphor for so much sustainability work as a ballistic trajectory going from A to B of the transition, that you have A and then you have B as if they're completely changed. Metaphor that better suits for me the kind of more convivial notion of caring approach to this that I try to emphasize, owing a huge debt to feminism in particular, I think, is the kaleidoscope. You shake a kaleidoscope, everything that was at the end it's just the relations, the patterns have changed. And that's what I mean about control and care. It's not about eradicating control, suppressing it in almost a quasi-violent way. It's about reordering how we express these different relations. So for me then, conflict does not mean violence. The idea that it has to mean it is part of the problem. We shouldn't shy away from conflict. We should be able to engage in conflict in ways that are civilized and humane and kindly and caring, but at the same time not deny the conflicts of interests and of values. That's what makes us a plural society, mutually respectful, I think. So I don't think conflict does mean violence, and the way to avoid violence, both materially and in our imaginations, is to become more plural and open about genuine conflicts.
Thank you so much. The next question is actually coming from our online participants. Lassie says, thanks, Andy. Do you see the emergence of sustainability science as part of the control fallacy? He suspects that it is very difficult for much of the scientific community to adopt murmurating politics instead of, for example, evidence-based policy.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm taken away. There's no disrespect to sustainability science. All the disciplines that are formative of me also bear this imprint. Unless you work hard, you are imprinted by this same imagination. Even science and technology studies, which prides itself on being highly critical, I think is inadvertently shaped in some of its modes of work by this same thing. So it's no criticism of sustainability science to say that, but there are ways around it. I mentioned, sensitivity analysis, for instance, present one's results with open humility, showing that actually this apparent picture of settled prescriptive implications for action is in fact much too exaggerated, that behind it there are many different conclusions one can draw from a typical sustainability science exercise, whether it be life cycle analysis or environmental assessment or whatever form it's taking. So yes, I think it has been imprinted by this. It has been part of the controlling imagination, but so too is that true of most of academia. And to get beyond that, especially when academia is self-consciously critical, it's vulnerable to that. So, but I do think that the ways of beyond it are quite practical in the ways I suggested. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that would be my quick take.
All right, hands again in the audience. All right, let's go right here, blue blazer.
Thank you, Andrew. Excellent presentation and very innovative also. I'm a professor.
Oh, you got to just write into it like you're eating.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, no problem.
Very good. I'm a Kai Kokko professor of environmental law at the University of Helsinki. And I have a very simple question for you concerning the EU's Green Deal. I'm sure that you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Is it a controlled transition,
mm-hmm.
caring transformation, or mm-hmm. something else?
Yes. Thank you. So I did try to mention that, first of all, the distinction between control and care is polythetic, multidimensional. It's not about eradicating control. That would be a contradiction, a delicious irony to try and control away control. So the vision of control and care is just to be more, part of it is recognizing that for every controlling intervention, there are counterparts, and care is an imperfect way to think our way through, where you afford agency to what it is you're engaging with. You're much more plural and humble in the ways I tried to say, at the same time as being committed. So the Green New Deal, I would say, the role, as in the accounts I gave of previous transformations, I was not saying that policy interventions, academic business activities were irrelevant. I was saying they need to be driven by this bigger picture and acknowledge that, not claim for them role, that they are somehow formative of the change that needs to take place. So in that light, yes, all these kinds of initiatives of the kind that Minna, for instance, went through really nicely at the beginning, albeit they're not ordered necessarily in a neat sequence, but they're all there, and she drew it out really nicely. These all have parts to play. It's just that if we think of them as being solutions, if we think of them as being the way forward, above all, if we think we have to petition a cockpit in order to get patronage, to then, to have policy attention, as academics are often told, you need to work for impact. Well, who are you trying to impact? You become disciplined by that agenda. So if we can avoid that and regard them as horizontal actions, not as vertical interventions, then I think they have a crucial role to play.
One more short one, hands up. Anyone? All right, got right over here. Run. We're doing okay though, because I don't have to make the announcements again. So,
Hi, thank you. It's Eva Berglund from Aalto this time. Thank you. This is absolutely fantastic. It's resolved a practically existential crisis for me, but it's also making me think about the different kinds of social movements we have, because we have social movements from the top, like Mont Pelerin Society. We have a lot of elite pushback against the stuff that we in this room all believe in. And we also have social movements from below that are explicitly anti-sustainability. So I'm wondering whether in the kind of spirit of the kind of plurality that you're advocating, we could maybe think of different kinds of languages, because I'm thinking if I started to use the term colonial modernity to talk about my research in Northern Finland, I don't think it would get very far. So I'm wondering if I should maybe try in the same spirit, do something like extractive modernity, or weird as in Western educated, environmental rich, that kind of thing. But thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for the kind words, but thank you for the challenge. It's a really good one. And actually, Northern Finland is a place. I mean, the word. So first of all, I'm not policing words. Whatever words work, use them. It's the ideas that matter, and then behind them, the actions that are imprinted in those ideas. So please, don't take me as trying to insist on transition means that, transformation means that. It's just it's a catalyst for the kind of things you're talking about. Northern Finland may know more about colonial modernity and certainly coloniality. I mean, I think Sami people have been quite eloquent about some of the imprints of that, albeit in ways that are quite diverse. For me, it's the real challenge is about what do we unleash the monster, to sort of maybe go further than you intended with what you said. Authoritarian populism is part of those collective action social movements, right-wing movements, anti-sustainability. You're absolutely right. Climate denialism. You're absolutely right. I think the challenge is actually quite important to take seriously. That for me, I believe that a large part of the reason why the move towards authoritarian populism in all its forms around the world has been so strikingly, paradoxically coordinated across nations, these nationalists are amazingly coordinated. Why is that happening around the world? It's not I don't think it's a controlling hand. It's a response to this controlling agenda organized really quite strongly around environmentalism and climate change in the middle of that. So less is more. If we, who are in fact very privileged actors, we don't feel it, but the way these global institutions are moving, they pay reference to our kind of discourse around climate, around biodiversity, and it's framed horribly authoritarian, horribly technocratic. Do what the science says, as Greta Thunberg says. Do what the science says. That's authoritarian. We shouldn't be surprised that we provoke those other moves back against us. If we conduct ourselves in a more humble way, remain committed, epistemically and in normative terms, but be more humble about it, we avoid provoking that. So I think actually to take democratic action seriously in the fashion about the capacity to challenge power, recognize that privilege and power, even of our own kinds, needs to be challengeable. That's what science, I do think it means leaving space for these critical debates of ourselves as well. Otherwise we provoke the very thing we're trying to actually challenge.